The desperate mechanic's gamble. What happens when a broke single father discovers a billionaire's abandoned yacht and decides to restore it without permission? This is the story of Daniel Carter, a struggling boat mechanic who made a choice that would either destroy his life or transform it forever. Stay with me until the end to see how this impossible love story unfolds, and comment below what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The salt-stained dawn crept over Newport Harbor, like a whispered secret painting the weathered docks in shades of amber and desperation. Daniel Carter stood at the edge of Pier 47, his calloused hands wrapped around a steaming cup of gas station coffee, watching the morning fog dance between the masts of forgotten dreams. At 34, he looked older, lines etched deep around his steel-gray eyes, from squinting into too many sunrises, searching for hope in a world that seemed determined to crush it. "Daddy, you're doing that thing again," came a voice as bright as church bells on Easter morning. Daniel turned to find his 8-year-old daughter Lily skipping toward him with her backpack bouncing against her small frame. Her honey-blonde hair caught the early light like spun gold, and her green eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkled with the kind of pure joy that made his chest ache with both love and fear. She was his everything, his reason for breathing, his motivation to keep fighting when the world felt like it was drowning him. "What thing, sweetheart?" he asked, though he already knew. "That staring thing, like you're trying to see into tomorrow." Lily slipped her small hand into his much larger one, her fingers cold, but her grip steady. "Mama used to say you did that when you were worried about money." The mention of Sarah hit him like it always did, a swift, sharp pain that had dulled over the 3 years since the cancer took her, but never truly disappeared. He squeezed Lily's hand gently, drawing strength from her presence. "Just thinking about work, baby girl. Nothing for you to worry about." But worry was exactly what gnawed at Daniel's gut like a hungry rat. The stack of bills on their kitchen table seemed to multiply overnight past due notices for electricity, water, and the mortgage on their tiny 2-bedroom house 3 blocks from the harbor. His boat repair business, Carter Marine Services, barely kept them afloat. Most days he felt like he was trying to bail out the Titanic with a coffee cup. "Mrs. Henderson says I'm the smartest kid in 3rd grade, Lily announced, changing the subject with the casual grace only children possessed. "She says I could be anything I want when I grow up. Maybe a doctor or a teacher or—" She paused dramatically, her eyes growing wide with possibility. "A boat captain like you." Daniel's heart swelled and broke simultaneously. His daughter's dreams were limitless, boundless as the ocean itself. But dreams required resources, opportunities, a future he wasn't sure he could provide. The private school she attended on a partial scholarship was already stretching their budget to the breaking point, but he'd be damned if he let her settle for less than she deserved. "You can be anything you want, Lily Carter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Anything at all." They walked hand in hand down the weathered planks of the pier, past the collection of modest fishing boats and weekend cruisers that made up Daniel's usual clientele. The harbor was waking up around them, seagulls crying overhead, the distant rumble of diesel engines coming to life, the splash of waves against hulls worn smooth by countless storms. Daniel's workshop sat at the end of the pier, like a faithful old dog, its corrugated metal siding painted a faded blue that had once been vibrant as a summer sky. Inside, the familiar smells of motor oil, salt air, and old wood greeted them like an embrace. Tools hung in precise order on pegboard walls, his father's tools and his grandfather's before that. 3 generations of Carter men had made their living coaxing life from dead engines and healing wounded vessels. "Can I help today?" Lily asked, dropping her backpack beside his workbench. I promise I won't touch the dangerous stuff." Daniel smiled, remembering himself at her age, eager to learn the mysteries of pistons and propellers from his own father. "After school, sweetheart. Education, first, boats second." "But boats are education," she protested with 8-year-old logic. "You're always teaching me stuff, like how engines breathe and why boats float and why little girls need to catch the school bus." Daniel interrupted gently, glancing at his watch. "Speaking of which," the morning routine continued with practiced efficiency. Daniel packed Lily's lunch peanut butter and jelly again, but she never complained while she gathered her homework and double-checked her backpack. These quiet moments were precious to him, ordinary treasures that most people took for granted. In the chaos of bills and worry and the constant struggle to keep their heads above water, these simple rituals with his daughter were his anchor. "Daddy." Lily's voice was suddenly smaller, more vulnerable. "Are we going to be okay?" The question hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. Kids were intuitive creatures, sensitive to the unspoken tensions that adults tried to hide. He knelt down to her level, taking her small face in his work-roughened hands. "We're going to be fine, baby girl. I promise you that. Your old dad's pretty good at fixing things, remember?" She nodded, but he could see the shadow of uncertainty in her eyes. It mirrored his own fears, the ones that kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling and calculating how many more months they could survive if business didn't improve. After Lily left for school, Daniel threw himself into work with the desperate energy of a drowning man. The day's first job was a temperamental outboard motor that belonged to Tommy Marchetti, a local fisherman whose boat had been in the family for 40 years. The engine wheezed and sputtered like an old man with pneumonia, but Daniel's skilled hands coaxed it back to life with the patience of a surgeon. "You're a miracle worker, Danny," Tommy said, counting out crumpled bills from his wallet. "Don't know what I'd do without you." The $40 barely made a dent in Daniel's mountain of debt, but it was honest money earned with sweat and skill. He tucked it into his wallet next to the other small bills that represented his family's survival, one repair at a time. The morning passed in a blur of routine maintenance, oil changes, spark plug replacements, the endless small fixes that kept Newport's modest fleet operational. But as the fog began to lift around midday, Daniel noticed something that made him pause in his work. There, in the deepest part of the harbor, where the wealthy kept their pleasure craft, sat a yacht unlike anything he'd ever seen. Even from a distance, it commanded attention, sleek and magnificent, easily 100 feet of pure maritime luxury. But something was wrong with the picture. The vessel sat too low in the water, its once pristine white hull stained with rust and neglect. No lights, no movement, no signs of life. Abandoned. Daniel had heard whispers about the yacht over the past few months, rumors and speculation that rippled through the harbor community like waves from a distant storm. Some said it belonged to a billionaire who'd simply walked away from it. Others claimed it was part of an inheritance dispute locked in legal limbo, while lawyers grew fat on retainer fees. But everyone agreed on one thing: the magnificent vessel was slowly dying, forgotten and alone. "Catherine's Dream," he murmured, reading the name painted in elegant script across the stern through his binoculars. Even the letters seemed to carry a weight of sorrow, as if the boat itself mourned its abandonment. The afternoon brought more customers, more small repairs, more crumpled bills added to his meager collection. But Daniel found his eyes drawn repeatedly to the abandoned yacht, pulled by something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the waste of it, though. Watching something so beautiful slowly deteriorate did offend his craftsman's sensibilities. There was something else, a sense of kinship, perhaps the recognition of another lost soul adrift in circumstances beyond its control. When the last customer left, and Daniel began cleaning his tools, the late afternoon sun painted the harbor, in shades of gold and crimson. The abandoned yacht seemed to glow in the dying light, transformed from a symbol of neglect into something almost magical. He found himself walking to the end of his pier, drawn by an impulse he didn't fully understand. "What are you thinking?" he asked himself aloud, but his heart already knew the answer. Daniel Carter was thinking about taking the biggest risk of his life. The idea was insane, reckless, potentially disastrous. Trespassing on private property, unauthorized repair work, the legal implications alone could destroy him. But as he stared at the dying yacht, he saw something else: opportunity wrapped in danger, possibility disguised as catastrophe. What if he could restore her? What if he could bring Catherine's dream back to life? The yacht represented everything he'd ever dreamed of: working on sophisticated systems, cutting-edge technology, the kind of project that could establish his reputation and transform his struggling business. More importantly, if he could prove himself capable of handling such a restoration, it might open doors to the kind of high-end clientele that could secure his and Lily's future. But the risks, the risks were enormous. As darkness began to settle over the harbor, Daniel made his decision. He would go aboard just to look, just to assess what might be possible. A reconnaissance mission, nothing more. He owed it to himself and to Lily to explore every option, no matter how dangerous. He waited until well after midnight, when the harbor was cloaked in darkness, and the only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves against hulls. Moving like a shadow, Daniel slipped his small dinghy into the water and rowed silently toward Catherine's dream. His heart hammered against his ribs with each stroke, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the stillness. Up close, the yacht was even more magnificent than he'd imagined. Despite its neglect, the bones of her were strong, the lines elegant and purposeful. This wasn't just a boat. It was a masterpiece of marine engineering, built by craftsmen who understood that beauty and function were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of perfect design. Daniel tied his dinghy to the yacht's swim platform and climbed aboard, his breath catching as his feet touched the teak deck. Even in the moonlight, he could see the quality of the construction, the attention to detail that spoke of unlimited resources and uncompromising standards. The main salon doors were unlocked, another sign of the yacht's abandonment. No owner in their right mind would leave such a vessel unsecured. Daniel pushed inside and fumbled for a light switch, his pulse racing as the interior was revealed in all its faded glory. The salon was a testament to luxury and taste: hand-carved woodwork, marble surfaces, leather seating that had probably cost more than Daniel made in a year. But everywhere he looked, he saw the signs of neglect: water stains on the ceiling, mildew creeping along the edges of windows, the musty smell of disuse and decay. It broke his heart and inflamed his imagination in equal measure. Moving deeper into the yacht, Daniel discovered a child's playroom that made his chest tighten with emotion. Toys sat abandoned on shelves, expensive dolls and model boats, puzzles and books gathering dust like forgotten dreams. On one wall, someone had carefully marked a child's growth with pencil lines and dates. The most recent mark was dated 15 years ago, when the child had reached 4 feet 2 inches. A little girl roughly Lily's age when the measurements stopped. In the master stateroom, Daniel found personal effects that told a story of wealth and tragedy. Family photographs showed a distinguished man with kind eyes and a bright smile, always accompanied by a serious-looking girl with dark hair and intelligent eyes. The man appeared to be her father, and their relationship was evident in every picture: sailing together, traveling to exotic locations, sharing moments of pure happiness that seemed to glow from the faded prints. But the photos told another story, too. As the girl grew older, the man appeared increasingly frail, his smile more forced, his eyes shadowed with worry. The last photos in the collection showed him gaunt and pale, clearly ill, while the girl, now a teenager, stood beside him with the hollow expression of someone watching their world crumble. Daniel found the boat's logbooks in the chart room, leather-bound volumes that chronicled years of adventures across the world's oceans. The handwriting was strong and confident in the early entries, describing passages to the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, the South Pacific. But the later entries became shorter, more sporadic, until they stopped altogether 3 years ago with a final heartbreaking notation. Catherine grows more distant each day. I fear I've failed her as a father, that my illness has stolen not just my strength, but her childhood. If something happens to me, I pray she finds peace and purpose. This boat was meant to bring us together, but I worry it will only remind her of what we've lost. Thomas Alexander Thompson. The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Thomas Thompson, he'd heard that name before, seen it in newspaper obituaries and business magazines. Thompson Shipping, one of the world's largest maritime companies worth billions. And this yacht, Catherine's dream, had been his pride and joy, named for the daughter who was now presumably one of the wealthiest women in the world, and she'd abandoned it. Left it to rot in Newport Harbor like a painful memory she couldn't bear to face. Daniel spent the next hour exploring every inch of the yacht, his trained eye cataloging the work that would be needed to restore her to glory. The engines were sophisticated German diesels, currently seized with corrosion, but salvageable with patience and skill. The electrical systems were state-of-the-art but compromised by moisture and neglect. The hull was sound-built to withstand decades of use, but the cosmetic damage was extensive. It would take months of work, thousands of dollars in parts and materials expertise in systems he'd never worked on before. It would be the challenge of a lifetime, a project that would push every skill he possessed to its absolute limit. It would also be completely, utterly illegal. As dawn approached, Daniel reluctantly prepared to leave. But as he stood on the deck one last time watching the sun rise over the harbor, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about money or reputation, or even providing for Lily's future. This yacht was dying, and he couldn't stand by and watch that happen. Not when he had the skills to save her, to bring her back to life, and honor the love that had created her. He thought about the little girl in those photographs, now a woman bearing the weight of inherited wealth and childhood trauma. She'd abandoned this yacht because it hurt too much to keep, but what if he could transform it from a source of pain into something beautiful again? What if he could give her back not just a restored vessel, but a piece of her father's love? The risk was enormous. If he was caught, he could face criminal charges, lawsuits that would destroy him financially. But if he succeeded, he might change everything. Daniel Carter made his choice as the first light of dawn painted the harbor gold. He would restore Catherine's dream not as a thief or a trespasser, but as a guardian of beauty and memory. He would work in secret, using every spare moment and every dollar he could spare, driven by a vision of what the yacht could become. He had no idea that his decision would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just the yacht, but his entire life. He couldn't know that somewhere in a Manhattan penthouse, Catherine Thompson lay awake most nights, haunted by dreams of the boat she'd abandoned and the father she'd lost. He couldn't foresee the storm that would test his resolve, or the moment when the billionaire heiress would finally return to face her past. All Daniel knew was that he had found his purpose, his great work, his chance to create something magnificent from the ruins of neglect and sorrow. The restoration of Catherine's dream was about to begin, but first he had to tell Lily. The conversation with his daughter that evening was one of the hardest of his life. They sat in their small kitchen sharing a dinner of mac and cheese from a box, when Daniel finally found the courage to speak. "Lily, what would you say if Daddy told you he found a project that could change our lives?" She looked up from her bowl orange cheese sauce on her chin, her green eyes curious. "Good change or scary change?" "Both," he admitted. "It would mean working on the most beautiful boat I've ever seen, but it would also mean taking some big risks." Lily considered this with the seriousness that only children could bring to life's important questions. "Is it the big white boat you keep staring at?" Daniel's surprise must have shown on his face because Lily giggled. "I'm not blind, Daddy. You look at it the same way you used to look at Mama, like it matters." The observation was so astute, so perfectly accurate, that Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. His daughter was growing up too fast, becoming wise beyond her years out of necessity. "It would mean working at night sometimes," he continued carefully, "and keeping secrets for a while. And there's a chance things could go wrong." "But you think they'll go right?" "I think they could be amazing." Lily reached across the table and took his hand in both of hers, her small fingers wrapping around his with surprising strength. "Then we should try. Mama always said you could fix anything if you loved it enough." And there it was, the wisdom of innocence, the pure faith of a child who believed her father could work miracles. Daniel squeezed her hands and made a silent promise that whatever happened, he would prove worthy of that trust. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel began planning the restoration of Catherine's dream. He spread nautical charts across his kitchen table, sketched diagrams of the yacht's systems, and calculated costs with the methodical precision of a general planning a campaign. The project would require everything he had, and more time, money, skill, and courage he wasn't sure he possessed. But as he worked by lamplight in the small kitchen where he'd shared countless meals with his family, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of survival, but the bright, burning hope of possibility. The chance to create something extraordinary, to honor beauty and love and the dreams of men who dared to build their visions in wood and steel and brass. The restoration would begin tomorrow night under cover of darkness, with nothing but his skills and determination to guide him. He had no way of knowing that his work would soon attract the attention of powerful forces, harbor patrol, maritime authorities, and eventually, the woman whose name graced the yacht's stern. Catherine Thompson was coming home to Newport, drawn by reports of mysterious lights aboard her father's abandoned yacht. And when she arrived, she would find a working-class mechanic who had risked everything to resurrect her past breathing life into the vessel that held her most precious and painful memories. The collision of their worlds would be inevitable, explosive, and utterly transformative. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, Daniel Carter simply planned and hoped and dreamed of bringing beauty back to life. The greatest restoration project of his career and the love story of a lifetime was about to begin. The first night aboard Catherine's Dream, Daniel's hands trembled as he descended into the engine compartment. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the twin German diesels that had once propelled this magnificent vessel across the world's oceans. Now they sat silent and corroded, their chrome dulled by neglect, their pistons seized with rust and time. "Easy, girl," he whispered, running his calloused palm along the engine block, like a veterinarian examining a wounded animal. "I know it hurts, but we're going to make you whole again." The irony wasn't lost on him here. He was a man barely keeping his own life together, promising to heal something worth more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes. But as his trained eye assessed the damage, Daniel felt the familiar stirring of excitement that came with a worthy challenge. These engines weren't beyond salvation. They were sleeping giants waiting for the right touch to wake them. He worked until the pre-dawn hours, carefully documenting everything with his phone's camera. Every corroded fitting, every seized component, every system that would need attention. The list grew longer with each passing hour. But so did his understanding of the yacht's magnificent complexity. This wasn't just marine engineering. It was artistry expressed in steel and bronze and precision-machined components. When exhaustion finally forced him back to shore, Daniel felt like he'd been granted a secret audience with sleeping royalty. The yacht's problems were extensive, but not insurmountable. With patience, skill, and resources he didn't yet have, Catherine's dream could sail again. The next evening brought Lily to the workshop, her homework spread across his workbench, while he organized tools for another clandestine mission. "You're humming," she observed without looking up from her math problems. "Am I?" Daniel paused in his inventory of socket wrenches. "Mama's song. The one she used to sing when she was happy about something." Lily glanced up with those perceptive green eyes. "Are you happy about the secret boat project?" Daniel's chest tightened. He hadn't realized he'd been humming Sarah's favorite melody, an old folk tune about sailors and distant shores. "I guess I am, sweetheart. It feels good to have something big to work toward. Even if it's scary, sometimes the best things are scary. That's how you know they matter." Lily considered this with 8-year-old seriousness before returning to her homework. 17 times 6 is 102, she announced proudly. "Just like your mama, brilliant with numbers." Daniel ruffled her hair, grateful for these ordinary moments that anchored his increasingly extraordinary evenings. The third night aboard Catherine's Dream, Daniel made his first real breakthrough. Armed with penetrating oil and the patience of a saint, he began the delicate work of freeing the seized engines. It was surgery performed with wrenches and wisdom, each turn of the crankshaft, a small victory against entropy and abandonment. As he worked, Daniel found himself talking to the yacht, like she could hear him. "You were somebody's pride and joy once," he murmured, feeling a particularly stubborn bolt finally give way. "Somebody loved you enough to name you after their daughter. We're going to find that love again." The boat seemed to respond to his ministrations, settling slightly in the water as systems came back online. When Daniel managed to coax a few drops of fuel through the injection system, he felt like he'd performed a minor miracle. By the end of the first week, word had begun to spread through Newport's tight-knit maritime community. Late-night dog walkers reported seeing lights aboard the abandoned yacht. Harbor Patrol received anonymous tips about possible trespassers. Daniel knew his window of secrecy was closing, but he couldn't stop. Each night brought new progress, new systems restored to life, new hope that his impossible dream might actually succeed. "Mr. Carter!" The voice made Daniel freeze as he prepared to leave the workshop for another nocturnal adventure. Officer Maria Santos of the Newport Harbor Patrol stood silhouetted in his doorway, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. "Evening, Officer Santos. Working late." Daniel's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady. "Could ask you the same thing. Mind if I come in?" Daniel's mind raced through possible responses, each more incriminating than the last. "Of course, coffee's terrible, but it's hot." Maria stepped inside, her dark eyes taking in the organized chaos of his workshop. She was a good officer, thorough, fair, and unfortunately perceptive. Daniel had repaired her patrol boat twice in the past year, always professional interactions that had earned her respect for his skills. "Been getting some interesting reports lately," she said, accepting the offered mug of coffee. "Lights on that abandoned yacht out in the deep anchorage. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The moment stretched between them like a taut line ready to snap. Daniel could lie, deny everything, and hope she didn't pursue it. Or he could trust that Maria Santos was the kind of person who understood that sometimes good people had to take extraordinary risks. "That yacht is dying," he said finally, the words carrying the weight of confession. Maria's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's not really an answer to my question. It's the only answer I can give right now." Daniel set down his coffee and met her gaze directly. "But I will say this, nobody's getting hurt, nothing's being stolen, and something beautiful might get saved." They studied each other for a long moment, law enforcement training, warring with human intuition. Maria had grown up in Newport, had seen too many magnificent vessels abandoned by owners who treated them like expensive toys to be discarded when the novelty wore off. "Trespassing is still trespassing, Mr. Carter." "Yes, ma'am, it is. And unauthorized work on someone else's property is still vandalism even if your intentions are good." "I understand." Maria sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. "On the other hand, that yacht's been sitting out there for months with no sign of the owner. Maritime law gets complicated when vessels are effectively abandoned." Daniel felt a flicker of hope but didn't dare voice it. "I'll tell you what," Maria continued. "I didn't see any lights tonight. But if I start getting more reports, I'll have to investigate officially. You understand what I'm saying? Be more careful. Be a lot more careful. And Mr. Carter, whatever you're doing out there, make it count." After Maria left, Daniel sat in his workshop for a long time, staring at the tools that had been his father's and grandfather's legacy. The warning was clear, but so was the underlying message. Maria Santos believed in second chances and lost causes. She'd given him time, but not much. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the workshop. Daniel was replacing the water pump on a Boston whaler when a black Mercedes sedan pulled up to his pier with the quiet confidence of serious money. The woman who emerged was striking in the way that expensive education and unlimited resources created polished, composed, and radiating the kind of controlled power that made people step aside without being asked. She was perhaps 35 with shoulder-length auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her business suit probably cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage, but she moved with the unconscious grace of someone comfortable on boats. When she spoke, her voice carried traces of New England aristocracy tempered by years of corporate boardrooms. "Mr. Carter, I'm Alexandra Winters from Thompson Maritime Holdings." The name hit Daniel like a cold wave. Thompson, as in Thomas Thompson, the late billionaire whose yacht he'd been secretly restoring. His mouth went dry as implications crashed over him like a rogue wave. "How can I help you, Miss Winters?" He wiped his hands on a rag, buying time to think. "I understand you're one of the most skilled marine mechanics in Newport." Alexandra's smile was professionally warm, but didn't quite reach her eyes. "We have a rather unique situation that might benefit from your expertise." Daniel's pulse hammered in his temples. Did she know? Was this some kind of trap? "I'm always interested in interesting work," he managed. "Excellent. Walk with me." Alexandra gestured toward the end of the pier where Catherine's dream sat in the distance like a beautiful accusation. They walked in silence for a moment, the morning sun painting the harbor in shades of gold and possibility. Daniel tried to read Alexandra's expression, but her poker face was flawless. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, what do you know about yacht restoration?" "Depends on the yacht," Daniel replied carefully. "And the budget." Alexandra laughed, a sound like expensive champagne bubbling. "Budget isn't a concern. Quality is everything." They'd reached the end of the pier now with an unobstructed view of Catherine's dream. Alexandra stood with her hands clasped behind her back, studying the abandoned yacht with unreadable eyes. "Beautiful vessel," she said finally. "Built by Feedship in the Netherlands. 120 feet of absolute perfection when she was new. She's been sitting out there for months, Daniel observed, testing the waters. Yes, the owner passed away, and the estate has been complicated. Alexandra turned to face him, her storm-gray eyes intense. But we've recently received reports that someone has been conducting unauthorized work on the vessel. Daniel's blood turned to ice water. This was it, the moment his gamble crashed down around him. But instead of denying everything, he found himself speaking from the heart. She's dying out there. Excuse me, that yacht. She's dying. Salt water's getting into her systems, her engines are seizing up, her bright work is corroding. Every day she sits abandoned, she loses more of what made her special. Daniel's voice carried the passion of a man defending something he loved. It's criminal to let something that beautiful just waste away. Alexandra's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You speak as if boats have souls. Don't they? Daniel met her gaze steadily. That yacht was built by craftsmen who cared about excellence. She was owned by someone who loved her enough to name her after his daughter. She's carried families across oceans, created memories, been home to dreams and adventures. If that's not a soul, what is? For a long moment, Alexandra said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, less corporate. The owner's daughter inherited Catherine's dream along with everything else. But she's complicated. Brilliant, successful, but haunted by her father's death. She can't bear to keep the yacht, but she can't bring herself to sell it either. So it just sits there. Alexandra sighed, a sound that carried unexpected weight. But what if someone could restore it? Bring it back to the condition it deserves. Present it to her as a gift rather than a burden. Daniel's mind raced. Was Alexandra offering him legitimate work on the yacht he'd been illegally restoring? The irony was almost overwhelming. That would be an incredible project, he said carefully. It would require someone with exceptional skill, infinite patience, and absolute discretion. Someone who understood that this isn't just about mechanical systems, it's about healing old wounds and honoring memory. Their eyes met across the morning light, and Daniel saw something in Alexandra's expression that surprised him, hope tinged with desperation, the look of someone grasping at what might be a final chance. The daughter, Daniel said. She must have loved that boat once. More than anything in the world. It was her sanctuary, her escape, the place where she felt closest to her father. Alexandra's professional mask slipped entirely. But when he got sick, when the cancer started winning, she couldn't bear to be on the water anymore. Every sunset, every wave, every moment of beauty just reminded her that she was losing him. Daniel thought of his own daughter, of how Lily had struggled after Sarah's death, how certain songs and places and memories had been too painful to bear. The grief of children was a particular kind of devastation, pure and absolute, and seemingly without hope of healing. What's her name? He asked quietly. Catherine. Catherine Thompson. Alexandra studied his face for any sign of recognition. She's one of the most powerful businesswomen in the world now, but she's still that little girl who lost her father too soon. The weight of revelation settled over Daniel like fog. He'd been working on Catherine Thompson's yacht, the Catherine for whom it was named. He'd walked through her childhood playroom, seen her growth marks on the wall, held photographs of her happiest memories. In restoring her father's boat, he'd been restoring pieces of her lost childhood. If someone were to take on this restoration, Daniel said slowly, what kind of timeline would we be talking about? Money is no object, but time is. Catherine's birthday is in 6 months. If Catherine's dream could be restored by then presented to her as a gift from her father's estate. Alexandra's voice trailed off, thick with possibility. 6 months. Daniel's mind cataloged everything he'd learned about the yacht's condition, everything that would need to be rebuilt, refinished, replaced. It was ambitious to the point of insanity, but not impossible. Not if he had unlimited resources and official sanction. "I'd need to examine the yacht thoroughly," he said. "Inside and out. Every system, every component." "Of course. And I'd need complete authority to make decisions about the restoration. No committee meetings, no second-guessing from lawyers or accountants." Alexandra nodded. "The estate would give you carte blanche." "One more thing," Daniel added, his voice carrying new strength. "I don't work alone. My daughter comes with me to the yard sometimes. She's smart as a whip and well-behaved, but she's part of the deal." For the first time since their conversation began, Alexandra's smile was genuinely warm. Catherine loved that boat as a child. I think she'd appreciate having another little girl help bring it back to life. They shook hands on the pier as the morning sun climbed higher, sealing an agreement that would transform everything. Daniel Carter, struggling single father and small-time boat mechanic, had just been handed the commission of a lifetime. The irony that he'd already been working on the project for weeks would remain his secret for now. That evening, Daniel broke the news to Lily over dinner at their kitchen table. "Remember the secret boat project we talked about?" He began, hardly able to contain his excitement. Lily looked up from her spaghetti eyes, bright with curiosity. "The scary but good one. It just got official. I've been hired to restore the most beautiful yacht in Newport Harbor. The white one you keep staring at. The very same." Daniel grinned at his daughter's perceptiveness. "It's going to be the biggest job of my career, sweetheart. Enough to pay off all our bills, put money away for your college, maybe even buy us a bigger house." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Will it still be scary?" "Different kind of scary now. Scary because it's so important, not scary because we might get in trouble." "Good," Lily announced with 8-year-old certainty. "I like the good kind of scary better." That night, Daniel stood on his pier long after Lily had gone to bed, staring across the harbor at Catherine's dream. Tomorrow he would board her legally for the first time, armed with official permission and unlimited resources. The clandestine phase of the restoration was over now. The real work would begin. But as he watched the yacht's silhouette against the starlit sky, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the most challenging part of this project wouldn't be mechanical. Somewhere in a Manhattan penthouse, Catherine Thompson was probably staring out her own window, haunted by memories of a boat she'd loved and lost. Restoring Catherine's dream would require more than new engines and fresh paint. It would require healing wounds that had been festering for 15 years. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and possibility across the water. In 6 months, Daniel would either deliver a masterpiece or face the most spectacular failure of his career. But as he stood there in the darkness, surrounded by the quiet sounds of a sleeping harbor, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The restoration of Catherine's dream was no longer a desperate gamble or a romantic gesture. It was a mission, a calling, a chance to transform lives through the ancient alchemy of craftsmanship and love. The real work was about to begin. 2 days later, Daniel officially set foot on Catherine's dream as her appointed guardian and savior. Alexandra had arranged for the yacht to be moved to Newport Shipyard, where Daniel would have access to proper facilities, equipment, and suppliers. As a crane lifted the magnificent vessel from the water, Daniel felt like he was witnessing a resurrection. The shipyard's skilled craftsmen gathered to watch their weathered faces, reflecting professional appreciation for the yacht's lines and construction. These were men who'd worked on everything from racing yachts to commercial vessels, but Catherine's dream commanded a special kind of respect. "She's a beauty," muttered Frank Kowalski, the yard's senior rigger. "Shame to see her in such rough shape." "She won't be rough much longer," Daniel replied, his voice carrying quiet confidence. The next few weeks passed in a blur of assessment planning and careful dismantling. Daniel worked methodically through each system, photographing everything before it came apart, cataloging components that could be saved versus those that needed replacement. It was archaeological work, as much as mechanical, peeling away layers of neglect to reveal the yacht's original magnificence. Lily became his constant companion in the evenings and weekends, perched on a work stool with her homework, while her father brought engines back to life. She had an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that reminded Daniel of Sarah asking questions that showed she was really listening, really learning. "Why do boats need 2 engines, Daddy?" she asked one evening as Daniel carefully cleaned corroded fuel injectors. "Safety mostly," Daniel explained, holding up the tiny, precisely machined component to the light. "If one engine fails, you've still got the other one to get you home. But on a yacht like this, it's also about smoothness. 2 engines working together can push her through the water without vibration, without noise that would disturb the people on board. Like dancing partners." Daniel smiled at the analogy. "Exactly like dancing partners. They have to work together, trust each other, move as one." "Mama always said you were a good dancer," Lily observed casually, returning to her math homework. The comment hit Daniel unexpectedly, carrying him back to their wedding day, to countless evenings when Sarah would put on music and pull him away from whatever project was consuming him. They'd dance in their small living room, Lily giggling from her high chair, the 3 of them creating their own small universe of joy and love. "She was the good dancer," Daniel said softly. "I just tried not to step on her toes. I bet you could still dance if you wanted to." The observation lingered in Daniel's mind as he worked. When was the last time he'd done anything just for joy? When had he last allowed himself to imagine a future that included more than mere survival? As autumn deepened into winter, the restoration began to show dramatic progress. The engines, now completely rebuilt with precision, German components hummed with quiet power during testing. The yacht's electrical systems, updated with modern safety features, while maintaining period-correct aesthetics, brought light and life back to spaces that had been dark for too long. But it was the smaller details that revealed Daniel's growing obsession with perfection. He spent hours researching the exact shade of blue that had originally graced the yacht's hull, tracking down craftsmen who could replicate the hand-carved woodwork in the salon, sourcing period-correct fixtures that would maintain the vessel's authentic character while meeting modern standards. "You're not just restoring her," Alexandra observed during one of her weekly visits. "You're loving her back to life." Daniel looked up from the brass compass he was painstakingly polishing, his hands stained with metal polish and devotion. "She deserves nothing less." "Catherine's father would have appreciated that," Alexandra said quietly. "He was the same way, never satisfied with good enough, always pushing for excellence." "Tell me about her," Daniel found himself asking. "Catherine, I mean. What was she like as a child?" Alexandra's expression grew distant, touched with old affection. Fearless, curious about everything. She could take apart a radio when she was 10 and put it back together better than before. Her father used to joke that she had salt water in her veins instead of blood. And now she's brilliant, but guarded. Successful beyond measure, but haunted by ghosts. She runs her father's company like a machine, all efficiency and profit margins. But I sometimes wonder if she remembers what it felt like to simply love something without calculating its value. Daniel thought of the growth marks on the yacht's wall, the abandoned toys, the photographs of a little girl who'd once been sublimely happy on the water. Somewhere in Catherine Thompson's corporate armor was that child waiting to be rediscovered. Christmas came and went quietly with Daniel and Lily, exchanging modest gifts and sharing dinner with the handful of other marina families who'd become their extended family. But the real celebration was in the yacht basin, where Catherine's dream glowed under work lights like a Christmas miracle in progress. The hull gleamed with fresh paint, her name restored in elegant gold script that seemed to float on the transom. Inside, master craftsmen were installing new marble countertops and hand-stitched leather seating that matched the original specifications exactly. Every detail was perfect, every system better than new. But as winter gave way to spring, Daniel became aware of a growing tension in his chest. The restoration was proceeding flawlessly, ahead of schedule and under budget. Catherine's dream would be ready for her June deadline, transformed from a dying derelict into a floating palace worthy of kings. Yet success brought its own anxiety. What would happen when the project was complete? The thought of walking away from the yacht felt like abandoning a child. Over the months of painstaking work, Catherine's dream had become more than a job or even a passion project. She was family, a floating embodiment of everything Daniel believed about craftsmanship, dedication, and the power of love to transform broken things. "Penny, for your thoughts." Alexandra's voice interrupted his reverie. Daniel was standing on the yacht's bridge, testing the newly installed navigation systems while watching the sun set over Newport Harbor. The view from here was spectacular. The entire harbor spread out like a living painting, dotted with vessels of every description, all of them connected by the ancient human love affair with the sea. "Just thinking about what happens next," he admitted. "Worried about finding another project this exciting. Worried about losing this one." Daniel's honesty surprised them both. "I know she's not mine. I know she belongs to Catherine Thompson. And when this is over, I'll go back to fixing outboard motors and patching hull damage. But it's going to be hard to let go." Alexandra was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. When she finally spoke, her voice carried careful consideration. "Daniel, can I ask you something personal?" He nodded, curious. "Have you ever thought about what you'd do if money weren't an issue? If you could choose any life, create any future for yourself and Lily?" The question caught him off guard. For so long, his dreams had been limited to basic survival, keeping the lights on, putting food on the table, maintaining their small foothold in an expensive world. The luxury of unlimited possibility was something he'd stopped allowing himself to imagine. "I'd want to keep doing this," he said finally. "Working on boats that matter, bringing beauty back to the world. I'd want Lily to grow up knowing that work can be art, that taking care of beautiful things is a worthy way to spend a life. And if the right opportunity came along, something that would let you do that kind of work permanently." Daniel studied Alexandra's face, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite read. "I guess I'd have to see what the opportunity looked like." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter approaching the harbor. Daniel watched it circle once before heading toward the private helipad at the far end of the marina. Something about its purposeful flight pattern suggested this wasn't a casual arrival. Someone important was coming to Newport. "Speaking of opportunities," Alexandra murmured, her attention fixed on the helicopter. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned months ago." The serious tone of her voice made Daniel's pulse quicken. "What is it?" "Catherine Thompson is arriving tonight. She's going to see the yacht tomorrow morning." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. After months of working toward this moment, the reality of it felt surreal. Tomorrow, the woman whose childhood memories he'd been carefully preserving would stand on the deck of her father's restored yacht. She would see what love and craftsmanship could accomplish, but she would also be confronted with 15 years' worth of grief and loss and unresolved pain. "Is she ready for this?" Daniel asked. "I don't know," Alexandra admitted. "But ready or not, it's time. The restoration is nearly complete, and she can't run from her father's legacy forever." That night, Daniel lay awake staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom, his mind churning with anticipation and anxiety. Tomorrow would determine whether months of obsessive work had created a masterpiece or simply a beautiful reminder of what Catherine Thompson had lost. The difference would depend not on his craftsmanship, but on the mysterious workings of the human heart. Across town in a luxury suite at the Chandler Hotel, Catherine Thompson stood at her window staring out at Newport Harbor. She could see the lights of the shipyard in the distance where her father's yacht waited like a ghost from her past. Tomorrow, she would face the most beautiful and painful chapter of her childhood, restored to perfection by a stranger who somehow understood what the vessel meant. Neither Daniel nor Catherine slept much that night. Both stood vigil in their separate spaces, guardian and heiress craftsman, and owner, two souls about to be bound together by a yacht named for dreams and the enduring power of love. The morning mist clung to Newport Harbor like a silk shroud, softening the edges of reality, as Daniel made his final preparations aboard Catherine's dream. His hands moved with practiced precision, checking systems that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. Every brass fitting gleamed with mirror perfection. Every line of mahogany glowed with hand-rubbed warmth. Every mechanical component hummed with quiet efficiency. The yacht was ready, but was he? "Daddy, you're being nervous again." Lily's voice carried across the water from the dock, where she sat with her legs dangling over the edge school backpack, forgotten beside her as she watched her father's meticulous final inspection. "I'm not nervous, sweetheart. I'm being thorough." Daniel's voice carried across the still air, but even he could hear the tension threading through his words like wire under strain. "Mama used to say the same thing when she was nervous about her job interviews. I'm not nervous, Danny. I'm being prepared." Lily's impersonation of her mother's voice was so accurate, it made Daniel's chest tighten with memory and loss. 8 months of restoration work had led to this moment, and Daniel found himself caught between pride and terror. Catherine's dream was more than ready. She was magnificent, transformed from a dying derelict into something that transcended mere maritime engineering. She was poetry written in steel and wood and brass, a floating testament to what dedication and love could accomplish. But in less than an hour, Catherine Thompson would arrive to see what he'd done with her father's legacy. The woman whose childhood bedroom he'd meticulously restored, whose growth marks he'd carefully preserved on the yacht's walls, whose most precious memories were embedded in every surface he'd lovingly brought back to life. The thought of her reaction, approval, rejection, indifference, made his stomach churn with anticipation. "Mr. Carter," Alexandra's voice carried a note of carefully controlled tension as she approached along the dock, her usually perfect composure showing hairline cracks. "She's 5 minutes out." Daniel nodded, running his hand one final time along the gleaming mahogany rail. Every detail was perfect, from the hand-stitched leather cushions in the salon to the precisely calibrated navigation equipment on the bridge. Even the small touches spoke of obsessive attention, fresh flowers in the vases, the original family photos carefully restored and placed exactly where they'd been 15 years ago, the child's growth marks on the cabin wall cleaned and preserved like archaeological treasures. "How is she?" Daniel asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Quiet. Controlled. You know how powerful people get when they're about to face something that might break them. They armor up, become unreadable. Alexandra's storm-gray eyes reflected her own anxiety. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens this morning, whatever her reaction is, you've created something extraordinary here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The sound of a luxury sedan's engine hummed through the morning air, followed by the soft closure of car doors. Daniel's pulse quickened as footsteps approached on the wooden dock, measured confident steps that spoke of someone accustomed to command, but careful not to reveal vulnerability. When Catherine Thompson came into view, Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She was smaller than he'd expected, perhaps 5 feet 6 inches, but she carried herself with the kind of presence that made size irrelevant. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a navy blazer that managed to look both casual and expensive. But it was her eyes that captured Daniel's attention, storm-blue depths that held intelligence, pain, and a carefully guarded wariness that spoke of too many disappointments. She looked exactly like the little girl in the photographs he'd so carefully preserved, grown up and armored against a world that had taken too much from her too young. "Ms. Thompson," Alexandra said softly, "I'd like you to meet Daniel Carter, the craftsman who's been overseeing the restoration." Catherine's gaze moved from Alexandra to Daniel, and he felt the weight of her assessment like a physical thing. She was taking his measure, the calloused hands, the work clothes, the weathered face of a man who earned his living with skill and sweat. He stood straighter under her scrutiny, not from intimidation, but from pride in what those hands had accomplished. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was cultured, controlled, giving nothing away. "Alexandra tells me you've worked some kind of miracle." "I've just tried to honor what was already here," Daniel replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Your father built something extraordinary. I've simply helped her remember what she was meant to be." Something flickered in Catherine's eyes at the mention of her father, too quick to identify, but definitely there. Pain, perhaps, or longing, or the kind of complex grief that never truly heals. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the yacht's boarding ramp. "Of course. She's yours." Catherine's steps were careful, deliberate, as she crossed from the dock to Catherine's dreams deck. The moment her feet touched the teak planking, something in her posture changed, a subtle relaxation, as if some deeply buried part of her recognized home. Daniel followed at a respectful distance, with Lily close beside him and Alexandra bringing up the rear. He watched Catherine's face as she took in the restored deck, the gleaming brass fittings, the lovingly maintained woodwork. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but her hands told a different story. They trembled slightly as she reached out to touch the compass, binnacle, her fingers tracing brass that had been polished to mirror brightness. "It's exactly as I remember," she whispered so quietly Daniel almost missed it. They moved through the yacht in reverent silence. Catherine paused at the salon, her breath catching, as she saw the restored family photographs arranged exactly as they'd been in her childhood. Her father smiled out from the frames, young and healthy in the early pictures, showing the progression of years and illness in the later ones, but always with love shining in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. "You found these?" Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion she was fighting to control. "They were here all along," Daniel replied gently, "just waiting to be seen again." In the master stateroom, Catherine stood frozen at the threshold. Daniel had spent weeks restoring this space to perfection, the king-sized bed with its custom linens, the elegant sitting area, the writing desk where Thomas Thompson had penned his final log entries. But it was the small details that broke through Catherine's composure. her father's favorite books on the nightstand, his reading glasses in their familiar case, the silver-framed photo of her mother that had always sat on his dresser. "How did you know?" Catherine's voice was barely audible. "How did you know exactly how everything should be?" "I listened," Daniel said simply. "To the boat, to the memories she carried. She told me what was important." Catherine's laugh was shaky, touched with tears she refused to shed. "You sound like my father. He used to say boats had souls, that they remembered the love they'd been given." He was right. They continued the tour in silence, punctuated by Catherine's occasional sharp intake of breath. In the galley, she found her father's favorite coffee mug, carefully restored and placed in its accustomed spot. In the chart room, the logbooks were arranged exactly as they'd been, but now protected in archival quality cases that would preserve them for generations. But it was the child's cabin that finally broke her. Catherine stood in the doorway of what had been her childhood sanctuary. Her hand pressed to her mouth as she took in the painstaking restoration. The twin bed, with its cheerful yellow coverlet, the built-in desk where she'd done homework during long passages, the bookshelf filled with her favorite stories. And there on the wall beside the door were the growth marks, her father's careful pencil notations tracking her progress from age 5 to 16, when illness had stolen their last summer together. "Oh God," Catherine breathed, and Daniel saw her armor finally crack. "Oh, Daddy." She stepped into the room like someone entering a cathedral, her fingers trailing over surfaces that held the ghost of her younger self. When she reached the growth marks, she pressed her palm against the highest line, the last measurement her father had made before cancer consumed their world. "He was so proud of how tall I was getting," she whispered. "He used to joke that I'd be able to handle the lines better than any crew member he could hire." "You can still do that." Lily's voice piped up from the doorway, causing all the adults to turn in surprise. Daniel's daughter had been so quiet during the tour that they'd almost forgotten her presence. "Daddy taught me about lines and knots and stuff. It's not hard once you know the tricks." Catherine looked at Lily with something approaching wonder, this bright-eyed 8-year-old who spoke of sailing with casual confidence, who had grown up around boats the way Catherine herself once had. "How old are you, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, kneeling to Lily's level. 8 3/4, but I'll be 9 next month." Lily's smile was radiant, unguarded in the way only children could manage. "Daddy says I'm almost old enough to help with the really important stuff." 8 3/4, Catherine repeated, and Daniel saw her glance again at the growth marks on the wall. "That's a very important age for sailors." "That's what Daddy says too. He's teaching me navigation and weather reading, and how to listen to engines when they're not feeling good." Catherine's eyes moved from Lily to Daniel, and for the first time since boarding the yacht, her expression was unguarded. She saw a father teaching his daughter the skills he'd learned from his own father, passing down not just knowledge, but love wrapped in the ancient traditions of seamanship. She saw herself at Lily's age, eager and bright, and desperate to learn everything her father could teach her. Mr. Carter," Catherine said, rising to face him. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Daniel nodded, and they moved to the yacht's stern deck, while Lily and Alexandra explored the newly restored tender garage. The morning sun had burned off most of the mist, revealing Newport Harbor in all its sparkling glory. Catherine stood at the rail, her hands gripping the mahogany with white-knuckled intensity. "I need to ask you something," she said, without turning around. "And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Why did you do this to really? Not the official answer about honoring beauty and craftsmanship. The real reason." Catherine turned to face him, her storm-blue eyes intense with need to understand. You could have done a competent restoration, collected your fee, and moved on. But this is something else entirely. This is love letter written in wood and brass and perfectly restored memories. Why? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Have you ever lost something that defined who you were, something so fundamental to your sense of self that losing it felt like losing your soul? Catherine's sharp intake of breath told him he'd struck home. When my wife died, Daniel continued, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. The love, the partnership, the future we'd planned together. For months, I just went through the motions of living because I had Lily to take care of, but inside I felt dead. Then I found this yacht, abandoned and dying, and I saw myself in her. Something beautiful that had been left to rot because the pain of remembering was too great. And you thought you could fix us both. I thought maybe healing her might teach me how to heal myself. And maybe, just maybe, it might help her owner remember that love doesn't die when people do. It just gets stored in different places, waiting to be rediscovered. Catherine was crying now silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. I loved this boat so much when I was little. She was our sanctuary, our escape from the world. Even when Daddy got sick, even when everything else was falling apart, we were still happy here. Until being happy felt like betraying his memory. Catherine nodded, unable to speak. Your father's final log entry, Daniel said gently. He was worried that this yacht would only remind you of loss. But I think he was wrong. I think he built her to be a reminder of love, his love for you, your love for each other, the joy you shared on the water. That kind of love doesn't cause pain. It heals it. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching seagulls wheel overhead and listening to the gentle lap of waves against the hull. When Catherine finally spoke, her voice was stronger, more settled. How much do I owe you, Mr. Carter? Daniel blinked in surprise. I'm sorry. For the restoration. I assume you've kept detailed records of time and materials. Ms. Thompson, your estate already handled all that through Alexandra. I was hired to do a job, and I did it. No, Catherine said firmly. You were hired to restore a yacht. What you actually did was give me back my father's love. That's worth considerably more than any consulting fee. I don't want your money, Daniel said, and realized as he spoke that it was completely true. Seeing your face when you walked into that cabin, knowing that I helped put that feeling back in your life, that's payment enough for a dozen lifetimes. Catherine studied his face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people's motivations, searching for the angle, the hidden agenda that powerful people learned to expect. But Daniel's weathered features held only sincerity, the honest satisfaction of a craftsman whose work had served its deepest purpose. You're a very unusual man, Daniel Carter. I'm just a boat mechanic who got lucky enough to work on something that mattered. No, Catherine said, stepping closer. You're a man who understands that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold or negotiated. They can only be given freely from one heart to another. The intensity in her voice, the way she was looking at him, made Daniel's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. This was dangerous territory, the space where gratitude and admiration could transform into something deeper, more complicated. Daddy, Miss Thompson! Lily's voice rang out across the yacht. Come quick, I found something amazing. They found Lily and Alexandra in the yacht's library, a cozy space Daniel had restored with floor-to-ceiling bookcases and comfortable reading chairs. Lily was standing between a hidden panel, that had been cleverly concealed behind a false bookshelf. "I was looking at all the books," Lily explained excitedly, "and I noticed this one stuck out funny. When I pushed it in, the whole section moved." Daniel felt his face redden. He'd discovered the hidden compartment months ago during his initial survey, but had kept it secret, unsure whether its contents were meant to remain private. Inside were dozens of letters, love notes from Thomas Thompson, to his late wife, birthday cards, to Catherine, private thoughts and feelings he'd recorded, but never shared. "I'm sorry," Daniel said quickly. "I found this early in the restoration, but didn't feel right about mentioning it. The letters seemed too personal." Catherine's hands shook as she lifted the first envelope, recognizing her father's handwriting. The letter was addressed to "My dearest Catherine," and dated just weeks before his death. "Would you like privacy to read them?" Alexandra asked gently. Catherine looked around at the three faces watching her with concern and affection. Alexandra, who'd been her father's trusted friend. Daniel, who'd poured his heart into restoring her past. And Lily, whose innocent presence somehow made everything feel safer. "No," Catherine said softly. "Daddy wrote these letters to be shared. He was never good at expressing his feelings out loud, but he could write them beautifully." She opened the first letter with trembling fingers and began to read aloud in a voice thick with emotion. "My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you've finally returned to our boat. I hope, Daniel, that's the young man I've asked Alexandra to find someone who will understand what Catherine's dream means to our family, has helped you see her as I always did, not as a reminder of loss, but as a celebration of all the love we shared." Catherine's voice broke, and Daniel felt his own eyes fill with tears. Thomas Thompson had somehow known, even in his final illness, that his daughter would need guidance back to joy. He'd planned for this moment, orchestrated it from beyond the grave with the help of Alexandra, and the hope that the right craftsman would understand the deeper purpose of the restoration. "How did he know?" Catherine whispered. "How did he know you would be the one?" Daniel thought of the nights he'd spent aboard the yacht, feeling like he was communing with a ghost who guided his hands and whispered suggestions in his ear. The way every solution had presented itself at exactly the right moment, every detail had fallen into place as if choreographed by an invisible conductor. "Maybe he didn't choose me," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe the boat did." They spent the rest of the morning reading Thomas Thompson's letters, beautiful, heartfelt messages that painted a picture of a man who'd loved his daughter with every fiber of his being. Letters that apologized for leaving too soon, that celebrated her strength and intelligence, that begged her not to let grief steal the joy they'd shared on the water. The final letter was the longest, and Catherine read it with growing wonder. "My darling girl, I know you think this boat will always remind you of losing me, but I built her to remind you of finding yourself. Every sunrise we watched from her deck, every storm we weathered together, every quiet evening when we talked about your dreams. Those moments are part of her now, woven into her timbers and brass fittings and the very air in her cabins. When you're ready, when the pain has softened enough to let love back in, come home to Catherine's dream. Let her teach you how to sail toward happiness again. And if you're very lucky, you might find that the man who brought her back to life understands something about healing broken hearts with patient hands and unlimited love. Your devoted father, Thomas Alexander Thompson." The silence that followed was profound, charged with emotion and possibility. Catherine looked at Daniel with new eyes, seeing not just the craftsman who'd restored her father's yacht, but the man her father had somehow predicted would enter her life at exactly the right moment. "He knew," she breathed. "Somehow he knew." "Knew what?" Daniel asked, though his heart was already providing the answer. That I would need you, not just to fix the boat, but to fix everything else. The admission hung between them like morning mist, beautiful and fragile, and charged with potential. Daniel felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, his carefully ordered world tilting toward possibilities he'd never allowed himself to imagine. Ms. Thompson. Catherine, she corrected softly. If we're going to talk about fate and destiny and dead fathers playing matchmaker from beyond the grave, I think we can dispense with formality. Daniel's laugh was shaky, overwhelmed by the morning's revelations. Catherine, then. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that 8 months ago I was a woman who'd forgotten how to hope. I built walls around my heart so high that even I couldn't see over them. I convinced myself that success and control were enough, that I didn't need the messy complications of love and family and dreams. And now, Catherine moved closer, her storm-blue eyes intense with newfound certainty. Now I'm standing on my father's yacht, perfectly restored by a man who understood her soul better than I did. A man who sees beauty in broken things and has the patience to bring them back to life. A man whose 8-year-old daughter reminds me what I was like before grief made me forget how to believe in magic. Catherine. Daniel's voice was hoarse with emotion he was afraid to name. I know this is crazy. I know we barely know each other, that we come from different worlds, that the logical part of my brain is screaming warnings about rebound relationships and power imbalances and all the very reasonable objections to falling for someone I met 6 hours ago. But my father wrote in that final letter that the heart recognizes what it needs even when the mind can't understand why. And my heart is telling me that you're not just the man who saved this yacht, you're the man who could save me too. Daniel felt like he was drowning, in the best possible way, swept away by currents of possibility he'd never expected to navigate. This morning, he'd been a working-class mechanic, preparing to hand over the job of a lifetime and return to his ordinary existence. Now he was being offered something that felt like a fairy tale love adventure, a future beyond his wildest dreams. What about Lily? He asked the practical father in him still functioning, despite the emotional chaos. What about her? Catherine's smile was radiant. She's perfect. Bright and funny and completely unimpressed by my money or status. She likes me for me, which is something I haven't experienced in, well, maybe ever. And my work, my life here in Newport. Bring it with you. Bring all of it. Catherine's voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to making the impossible happen. I have houses all over the world, but none of them have ever felt like home. Maybe what I've been missing is the right people to share them with. You're talking about completely upending your life based on one morning with strangers. I'm talking about trusting my father's final gift to me. He brought us together for a reason, Daniel. The least we can do is see where it leads. Before Daniel could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway with Alexandra close behind. His daughter's face was bright with excitement, her arms full of the nautical books she'd discovered in the yacht's library. Daddy, did you know that some boats can sail all the way around the world? Ms. Catherine says her boat has been to every ocean. Lily's enthusiasm was infectious, her joy at being surrounded by maritime treasures evident in every gesture. Is that something you'd like to do someday? Catherine asked, kneeling to Lily's level. Sail around the world, I mean. Lily's eyes went wide with possibility. Could we really? Catherine's dream was built for global cruising, Catherine said seriously. She has all the equipment and range for extended voyages. The only thing she's been missing is a family brave enough to take her on adventures. A family. Lily looked from Catherine to her father with the kind of intuitive understanding that only children possessed. Do you mean all of us together? Daniel's heart clenched with love and terror in equal measure. His daughter was already weaving dreams around this miraculous morning, already accepting Catherine as a natural part of their small family. The trust and openness in Lily's expression was both beautiful and terrifying. What if this fairy tale morning dissolved into ordinary reality? What if Catherine changed her mind when the emotion wore off? Sweetheart, Daniel began carefully. Ms. Catherine and I have just met. These kinds of decisions take time. No, they don't, Lily interrupted with 8-year-old certainty. Not when they're right. Mama always said you could tell when something was right because it felt like coming home. Catherine's breath caught at the wisdom in those words. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She was, and she would have liked you. Lily's statement carried the simple authority of truth. Daddy's been sad for a long time, but he's not sad when he talks about this boat, and he gets that crinkly look around his eyes when he looks at you, the same one he used to get when Mama made him laugh. Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks, mortified that his 8-year-old daughter was reading him so accurately. But when he looked at Catherine, he saw understanding rather than embarrassment in her expression. The crinkly look is a good sign, Catherine said solemnly to Lily. It means he's allowing himself to be happy again. Exactly, Lily beamed. So when can we start sailing around the world? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the universe, demanding that the adults commit to the magic of the moment or retreat to the safety of rational caution. Daniel looked at Catherine, trying to read the future in her storm-blue eyes, searching for certainty in a situation that defied logic. There would need to be conditions, he said, finally, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Agreements about how this would work, what happens if it doesn't work out, Catherine finished gently. Daniel, I understand your caution. You have Lily to think about responsibilities that go beyond your own heart. But I need you to understand something about me. I don't make impulsive decisions about business, and I've never made them about my personal life either. This isn't a whim or a moment of emotional weakness. This is recognition. Recognition of what I've been searching for without knowing it. A man who creates beauty instead of consuming it. A child who sees wonder in everyday miracles. A chance to use my resources for something more meaningful than quarterly profit reports. Catherine's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who'd found their true north after years of navigation by false stars. And if we tried, really tried it, what would it look like? Catherine's smile was radiant with possibility. It would look like whatever we wanted it to look like. Private tutoring for Lily so she could learn while we traveled. A workshop for you on whatever vessel we were using so you could continue your craft while seeing the world. Time and space and resources to build something beautiful together. No pressure to be anything other than who we are. No pressure to be anything other than who you are. I fell in love with a boat mechanic who sees souls in sailing vessels, not a man trying to become something else to please me. The phrase "fell in love" electrified the air between them, honest and terrifying and absolutely true. Daniel saw his future spreading out in two distinct directions, the safe path back to his ordinary life of small repairs and careful survival, or the impossible path toward adventure and love and dreams made manifest. Daddy, Lily said quietly, tugging on his work shirt, what would Mama want you to do? The question hit him like a gentle wave, carrying with it the ghost of Sarah's voice and the memory of countless conversations about dreams deferred and chances not taken. Sarah, who died too young, with too many plans unfulfilled, who'd made him promise to live fully for both of them. Sarah, who'd believed that love was worth any risk, any challenge, any leap of faith. "She'd want me to be brave," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "She'd want me to choose love over fear, even if it scared me to death." "Then you'll do it." Catherine's question was barely a whisper, weighted with hope and vulnerability. Daniel looked around at the yacht his hands had brought back to life at the woman whose father had somehow orchestrated this impossible morning at his daughter, whose eyes shone with absolute faith in happy endings. The convergence of circumstances was too perfect to be coincidence, too meaningful to be mere chance. "We'll do it," he said, and felt the universe shift around his words. "God help us all, we'll do it." Catherine's smile could have powered the yacht's engines, bright and transformative and full of promise. She stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see flecks of silver in her storm-blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing her back to life, for bringing me back to life. Thank you for trusting a stranger with your most precious memories." "You're not a stranger anymore," Catherine said softly. "You're family." The words settled around them like a blessing, binding them together in ways that legal documents and formal agreements never could. They stood on the deck of Catherine's dream as the morning sun climbed higher, three souls who'd found each other against impossible odds, ready to write a new chapter in the yacht's long history of love and adventure. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, marking the moment when Daniel Carter's ordinary life transformed into something extraordinary. The restoration of Catherine's dream was complete, but the real journey toward love, toward healing, toward a future none of them could have imagined, was just beginning. The yacht rocked gently in Newport Harbor, ready once again to carry dreams across distant waters, her hull strong and her heart restored by the magic that happened when broken things found the right hands to heal them. The weeks that followed that transformative morning passed in a whirlwind of preparation and discovery that left Daniel feeling like he was living someone else's life. Catherine had insisted on taking things slowly, despite their dramatic declarations, a wisdom that proved itself as they navigated the complex dance of blending two vastly different worlds. "I've never seen you this nervous," Lily observed one evening, as Daniel paced their small kitchen, running his hands through his hair for the dozenth time. Catherine was coming for dinner, their first meal together in his modest home, and he felt like a teenager preparing for prom. "I'm not nervous, sweetheart. I'm just—" Daniel paused, searching for words that wouldn't worry his daughter. "I want everything to be perfect." "It will be," Lily said, with the confidence only children possessed. "Ms. Catherine likes us for who we are, remember. That includes our funny little house and your terrible cooking." Daniel couldn't help but laugh. "My cooking isn't terrible. Daddy, you put salt in the coffee last week because you were thinking about boat engines." The memory made him wince. It was true his mind had been scattered lately, torn between the familiar rhythms of his old life and the impossible possibilities of his new one. Catherine had spent the previous 3 weeks slowly integrating herself into their world, appearing at the marina to watch him work, taking Lily for ice cream, while he finished difficult repairs, gradually becoming part of the fabric of their daily existence. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she was coming to their home, the small, weathered house where he and Sarah had built their life together, where Lily had taken her first steps, where every corner held memories of love and loss and the slow work of healing. Having Catherine in that space felt like introducing her to the deepest parts of himself. The knock on the door came precisely at 6 o'clock, and Daniel's heart performed an elaborate drum solo as he went to answer it. Catherine stood on his front porch holding a bottle of wine and a bouquet of wildflowers. But it was her smile that took his breath away, warm and genuine, and slightly nervous, as if she too understood the significance of this moment. "I wasn't sure what to bring," she said, offering the flowers. The wine seemed too formal and chocolates felt presumptuous, so I settled on something that would make your home smell like summer. "They're perfect," Daniel said, accepting the bouquet and trying not to notice how their fingers brushed in the exchange. "Come in, please. Welcome to Carter Central Command." Catherine stepped into the small living room, and Daniel saw it through her eyes, the mismatched furniture that had been accumulated over years of careful budgeting, the family photos covering every available surface, the toys and books, and comfortable chaos of a home where a child was truly loved. If she found it lacking compared to her world of marble and mahogany, her expression didn't show it. "Oh, Daniel," she breathed, moving to examine the gallery of photographs. "This is beautiful." The pictures told the story of their family in frozen moments, Daniel and Sarah on their wedding day, young and radiant with hope. Lily as a baby, then a toddler, then the bright 8-year-old she was now. Vacations to modest beaches and camping trips in borrowed tents. Birthday parties and Christmas mornings and all the ordinary miracles that made up a life well lived. "That's Mama," Lily announced, appearing at Catherine's elbow to point at a photo of Sarah laughing on a boat, her blonde hair whipping in the wind. "She was pretty, right?" "She was gorgeous," Catherine agreed softly. "And she looks like she was happy." She was. Daddy made her laugh every day, even when she was sick. Lily's matter-of-fact delivery of this information made Daniel's chest tighten with familiar grief and pride. Catherine turned to look at him, her storm-blue eyes soft with understanding. "She raised an amazing daughter." "We both did," Daniel corrected gently. "Sarah just did most of the heavy lifting." Dinner was a revelation in controlled chaos. Daniel had attempted his signature dish, grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, and managed not to burn anything, which he considered a minor miracle. Catherine proved surprisingly adept at conversation, with an 8-year-old listening seriously to Lily's theories about marine biology and sharing stories about her own childhood adventures on the water. "Daddy says you've been on every ocean," Lily said between bites of salmon. "Which one was your favorite?" Catherine considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "The Mediterranean, I think, especially around the Greek islands. The water is so blue it doesn't look real, and the sunsets are like paintings come to life." "Could we go there on Catherine's dream?" "If your father agrees to my crazy plan, we absolutely could." Catherine's eyes met Daniel's across the small table. "Though I should warn you, I'm a terrible cook. We'd probably live on sandwiches and whatever fish your dad could catch." "That sounds perfect," Lily declared. "Daddy's really good at catching fish. He taught me how to tie flies and everything." As the evening progressed, Daniel found himself marveling at how naturally Catherine fit into their small domestic world. She helped clear dishes without being asked, listened to Lily's bedtime stories with genuine interest, and somehow managed to make their humble home feel warmer just by being in it. After Lily had been tucked into bed, Daniel and Catherine sat on the front porch with glasses of wine, watching the lights of Newport Harbor twinkle in the distance. The night air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. "This is nice," Catherine said quietly, her voice content in a way Daniel had never heard before. "Different from your usual evenings. Completely different. Usually I'm in my Manhattan apartment working on my laptop until I fall asleep in my desk chair. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales." Daniel studied her profile in the porch light, noting the lines of exhaustion around her eyes that expensive makeup couldn't quite hide. When was the last time you took a real vacation? Define real vacation. No work calls, no emails, no thinking about quarterly reports or board meetings, just being present in the moment. Catherine's laugh was rueful. I honestly can't remember. Maybe never. I went straight from boarding school to college to business school to running my father's company. There wasn't much time for frivolity. That's not frivolity, Catherine. That's living. She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. Is that what you think I need to learn how to live? I think you need to learn how to be happy, Daniel said gently. Real happiness, not just satisfaction from achievement or the relief of surviving another crisis. The kind of happiness that comes from small moments and silly conversations and watching someone you love discover something wonderful. The kind of happiness you had with Sarah. The mention of his late wife didn't sting the way it once had. Time and Catherine's presence had softened the sharp edges of grief, transforming it into something more like gentle melancholy. Yes, Daniel said simply. The kind we built together day by day, choice by choice. And you think we could build that, you and me and Lily? I think we're already building it. Daniel reached for her hand, marveling at how perfectly her fingers fit between his. Every evening like this, every shared meal, every moment when you make Lily laugh, we're creating something new. Catherine's smile was luminous in the soft light. I never thought I wanted a family. After my father died, I convinced myself that loving people was too dangerous, too painful when you lost them. It seemed safer to keep everyone at arm's length. And now I think maybe the pain of loving and losing is still better than the emptiness of never loving at all. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the harbor lights dance on the water. Daniel felt something he'd thought was lost forever, the deep contentment of being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the right person, in exactly the right moment. Daniel, Catherine said eventually, her voice carrying a note of nervous determination. There's something I need to tell you. About my plan for Catherine's dream. What about it? I've been thinking about what my father wrote in that final letter. About the boat being built to remind me of finding myself, not losing him. And I realized that keeping her as some kind of floating museum isn't what he intended. Daniel waited, sensing that whatever Catherine was about to say would change everything. I want to live on her, Catherine continued. Not just visit occasionally or take weekend trips. I want to make Catherine's dream our home, travel the world, see everything my father and I used to dream about seeing together. The magnitude of what she was suggesting hit Daniel like a rogue wave. Catherine, that would mean leaving everything behind. Your company, your responsibilities. I've already started making arrangements. Delegating authority, setting up systems that will let me run Thompson Maritime remotely. It turns out most of what I do can be done from anywhere with a satellite internet connection. But your life, your career, my career will survive. My life. Well, that's what I'm trying to save. Catherine turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with passion and determination. Daniel, I've spent 15 years building walls around my heart, convincing myself that success and control were enough. But they're not enough. They're not even close to enough. Daniel felt the earth shifting beneath his feet, the careful stability he'd built since Sarah's death threatening to crumble under the weight of possibility. What about Lily's school? Her friends? Private tutoring while we travel, the best education money can buy. And friends, she'll make friends all over the world. Children who speak different languages, who have different perspectives, who will teach her that the world is vast and beautiful and full of wonders. You've really thought this through. I've thought about nothing else for 3 weeks. Catherine's voice carried the conviction of someone who'd found their true purpose. Daniel, I'm 35 years old, and I've never felt truly alive except for the time I spent on the water with my father. These past few weeks with you and Lily watching you work, sharing meals, just being present in simple moments, it's like I'm finally remembering who I used to be. The confession hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Daniel could see the future she was offering, adventure and love, and a life beyond anything he'd ever imagined. But he could also see the risks, the ways such a dramatic change could go catastrophically wrong. I need to think about this, Mo, he said finally. Talk to Lily, make sure she understands what it would mean. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Daniel, Catherine squeezed his hand gently. Don't let fear make this decision for you. Don't let the possibility of loss prevent you from embracing the possibility of joy. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Lily's bedroom window sliding open above them. Daniel looked up to see his daughter's face pressed against the screen, her hair mussed with sleep. Daddy, is Ms. Catherine still here? I'm here, sweetheart, Catherine called softly. Are you okay? I had a dream about sailing, Lily announced with 8-year-old seriousness. We were on Catherine's dream, and we saw dolphins and mermaids and islands made of crystals. It was the best dream ever. Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible. That sounds like a wonderful dream. It wasn't just a dream, though. It felt like remembering something that already happened. Does that make sense? Daniel exchanged a meaningful look with Catherine. Out of the mouths of babes came truths that adults spent years trying to understand. It makes perfect sense, Catherine said gently. Sometimes our hearts know things before our minds do. So we're really going to sail around the world together. The question hung in the night air like a prayer, innocent and hopeful, and demanding an answer that would shape all their futures. Daniel felt the weight of his daughter's trust, the magnitude of the choice before them. We're thinking about it, sweetheart, he said carefully. It would be a big change, a big adventure. The best kind of adventure, Lily said with absolute certainty. Good night, Daddy. Good night, Miss Catherine. Dream about dolphins. The window slid shut, leaving Daniel and Catherine alone with the echo of childish wisdom and the pressure of making decisions that would echo through generations. She's extraordinary, Catherine whispered. She's Sarah's daughter, Daniel replied. Always been wise beyond her years. Always trusted that good things were possible even when the evidence suggested otherwise. And what do you trust, Daniel? The question cut to the heart of everything, his fears, his hopes, his careful plans and wild dreams. Daniel looked at Catherine's face in the porch light, seeing vulnerability and strength and a love that had grown from gratitude into something deeper and more transformative. I trust that some gifts are too precious to refuse, he said finally, even when they scare us to death. Catherine's smile could have powered the entire harbor. Is that a yes? That's a, let me talk to my daughter and make sure this is really what we all want. But Catherine, Daniel brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I think my heart already knows the answer. The following days blurred together in a kaleidoscope of planning and possibility. Daniel found himself caught between two worlds, his familiar routine of boat repairs and school pickups, and Catherine's universe of unlimited resources and global connections. The contrast was dizzying, but somehow Catherine managed to bridge the gap with grace and genuine interest in the details of his ordinary life. She arrived at the marina each morning with coffee and pastries, content to sit quietly, while Daniel worked, asking intelligent questions about marine systems and listening to his explanations with the focus of someone genuinely eager to learn. Watching her in work clothes instead of business suits, her expensive manicure chipped from handling tools, her perfectly styled hair escaping from practical ponytails, these small transformations felt more intimate than any grand gesture. "You don't have to do this," Daniel said one afternoon as Catherine handed him a wrench, with the casual competence of someone who'd been around boats her entire life. "Do what? Pretend to be interested in carburetor maintenance just to spend time with me." Catherine's laugh was bright and genuine. "Daniel Carter, I spent the first 16 years of my life on boats. I know more about marine engines than most people know about their own cars. I'm not pretending anything." "Then why the business suits and boardroom persona?" "Because I spent 15 years pretending to be someone else. Someone who didn't need the smell of salt air and the feel of a deck rolling beneath her feet. Someone who could find satisfaction in profit margins instead of perfect sunsets." Catherine wiped her hands on a shop rag, her expression thoughtful. "Turns out I'm a much better actress than I thought." That evening, Daniel made his decision. He found Lily in her bedroom surrounded by books about marine biology and world geography research for their potential adventure that she'd undertaken with typical 8-year-old thoroughness. "Sweetheart, we need to have a serious talk about Ms. Catherine's idea." Lily looked up from a picture book about coral reefs, her green eyes bright with attention. "About sailing around the world. About leaving everything we know behind. Our house, your school, your friends, the life we've built here." Daniel sat on the edge of her bed searching for words that would convey the magnitude of the choice without frightening her. It would mean trading everything familiar for something completely unknown. "But we'd be together, right? You and me and Ms. Catherine. Yes, we'd be together. And we'd see amazing places and learn about different cultures and maybe swim with dolphins." "Probably all of those things." Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Daddy, remember what Mama used to say about life being an adventure?" Daniel's throat tightened with memory. Sarah had indeed believed that life was meant to be lived boldly, that security was less important than growth, that love was always worth the risk. She said that adventures were what happened when you stopped being afraid of what might go wrong and started being excited about what might go right. Lily continued, her 8-year-old voice carrying wisdom beyond her years. "And what do you think, sweetheart? What feels right to you? I think Mama would want us to choose the adventure. I think she'd want you to be happy again. Really happy, not just okay, getting by happy." Lily reached for his hand with small fingers that had grown strong from helping around the marina. "And I think Ms. Catherine needs us to help her remember how to be a kid sometimes." The observation was so astute it took Daniel's breath away. Catherine did need that, needed Lily's unguarded joy, and his steady presence to balance the weight of responsibility and grief she'd carried for so long. "So, you want to do this really and truly?" "I want to do this more than anything," Lily said, with the conviction only children could muster. "When do we leave?" Daniel's laughter was shaky with relief and terror and overwhelming love for his daughter's brave heart. "Soon, baby girl. Very soon." The conversation with Catherine that night was different from their previous tentative discussions about the future. This time Daniel spoke with the certainty of a man who'd made his peace with impossibility. "We're in," he said simply, as they walked along the harbor's edge under a canopy of stars. Catherine stopped walking, turning to face him with eyes that reflected the harbor lights like captured constellations. "Really, both of you? Both of us? Lily's already started planning which books to pack, and I've been thinking about what equipment I'll need to set up a mobile workshop aboard Catherine's Dream." Catherine's smile was radiant, transformative, beautiful enough to stop traffic, and bright enough to power small cities. Daniel, I can't believe we're actually... Her words dissolved into tears of joy and relief, and Daniel found himself holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, and feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. This was real. This impossible, beautiful, terrifying thing they were building together was actually happening. When? Catherine whispered against his shoulder. Lily finishes the school year in 3 weeks. After that, we're yours. Not mine, Catherine corrected, pulling back to look into his eyes. Ours. We're building something together, remember? The distinction mattered more than Daniel could express. This wasn't about Catherine swooping in to rescue them from their ordinary life. It was about 3 people choosing to create something extraordinary together. The final weeks of preparation passed in a blur of logistics and emotions. Daniel sold his workshop to Frank Kowalski, the shipyard's senior rigger who promised to maintain the Carter family tradition of excellence. The small house that had sheltered their family through joy and sorrow was rented to a young couple expecting their first child, a symmetry that felt like blessing from the universe. Lily's classmates threw her a farewell party that was equal parts celebration and lamentation. 8-year-olds possessed an enviable ability to process major life changes with excitement rather than anxiety, and Lily basked in the attention of being the kid who was sailing around the world. "Promise you'll send postcards from everywhere," her best friend Emma demanded during the party. "I promise. And when we come back, I'll teach you all the sailor knots I learned." "When will you come back?" Lily looked across the room at her father and Catherine, who were deep in conversation with other parents about educational requirements and safety protocols. "I don't know exactly, but I know we will because this is still home. It's just not the only home anymore." The wisdom in that statement struck Daniel like lightning. Home wasn't a place, it was the people you loved and chose to build a life with. Catherine's dream would be their floating home, but Newport would always be the harbor they returned to. On their final night in the house, Daniel and Lily packed the last of their belongings, while Catherine helped organize books and toys and the accumulated treasures of 8 years of childhood. The rooms that had once been full of life now echoed with emptiness, but instead of sadness, Daniel felt anticipation. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Lily asked as they shared one last bedtime story in her empty bedroom. "Terrified," Daniel admitted honestly, "but also excited. Sometimes the best things in life require us to be brave even when we're scared." "Ms. Catherine is scared too, I can tell." "How can you tell?" "She gets that line between her eyebrows when she's thinking about something that worries her. But then she looks at us and the line goes away." Lily snuggled closer to her father in the sleeping bag they'd spread on the floor. "I think we make her feel brave. I think we make each other feel brave." The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect sailing weather for the beginning of their adventure. Catherine's dream sat at the pier, looking magnificent in the early light, her hull gleaming white as fresh snow, her bright work sparkling like jewelry, every line and curve speaking of grace and seaworthiness. The yacht's interior had been modified for long-term living. Daniel's workshop, installed in the former crew quarters, Lily's schoolroom set up in the library. Catherine's office equipped with satellite communications that would keep her connected to her business empire. But the modifications had been done with sensitivity to the yacht's character, honoring her heritage while adapting her for their new life. As they prepared to cast off, a small crowd gathered on the pier to see them off. Frank Kowalski and the other marina workers, Lily's classmates and teachers, neighbors who'd become family over the years of shared joys and sorrows. Alexandra stood at the edge of the crowd, her professional composure cracked by genuine emotion. "Take care of each other," she called as Daniel started the engines with the smooth competence of a man born to handle beautiful boats. "Take care of her," Catherine called back, gesturing toward the harbor that had been her father's favorite refuge, and now theirs as well. As Catherine's dream pulled away from the pier, Daniel felt the familiar thrill of a vessel coming alive beneath his hands. The yacht moved through the water with the grace her designers had intended, every system performing flawlessly, every detail reflecting the love and skill that had brought her back to life. But it was the sight of Catherine and Lily at the bow, their faces bright with excitement and wonder, that made this departure feel like a beginning rather than an ending. Catherine pointed out landmarks to Lily, sharing stories of her childhood adventures, while Lily asked questions with the boundless curiosity that had always made her father proud. As Newport Harbor fell away behind them and the open ocean beckoned ahead, Daniel felt Sarah's presence like a blessing on the wind. She would have loved this moment, the courage it represented, the love that had made it possible, the faith in the future that had overcome fear of the unknown. "Where to, Captain?" Catherine called from the bow, her voice carried on the salt breeze that had guided mariners for centuries. "Wherever the wind takes us," Daniel called back and meant it with every fiber of his being. Catherine's dream turned toward the horizon, where sky met sea in an endless promise of possibility. Behind them, Newport Harbor grew smaller, but not less significant. It would always be their anchor point, the place where their story began. Ahead lay adventures they could barely imagine, sunsets in foreign ports, storms to weather together, and all the beautiful uncertainty of a life lived boldly. The restoration of Catherine's dream was complete, but the real voyage toward love, toward healing, toward a future worthy of dreams, was just beginning. 3 months into their voyage, Daniel woke to the sound of rain drumming against Catherine's dream's deck and the deeper, more ominous rumble of thunder in the distance. They were anchored in a protected cove off the coast of Bermuda, but even here the approaching storm made the yacht dance restlessly on her anchor chain. "Daddy," Lily's voice came through the darkness of his cabin, small and uncertain. "The boat's moving funny." Daniel slipped from his berth and gathered his daughter into his arms, carrying her to the main salon where Catherine was already up, monitoring weather reports on the navigation computer. She wore one of his old work shirts over shorts, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, looking more like the sailor she'd been born to be than the corporate executive she'd spent years pretending to be. "How bad is it?" Daniel asked, settling Lily on the comfortable sofa while he studied the radar display over Catherine's shoulder. "Bad enough. We've got a significant weather system moving through 60-knot winds, heavy seas, the works. But we're in good holding ground here, and Catherine's dream was built to handle much worse than this." Daniel felt a familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with anticipation. This would be their first real test as a crew, their first chance to see how the three of them functioned under pressure. The past months had been mostly fair weather sailing, long days of gentle breezes and calm seas, perfect conditions for learning to live and work together on the water. "Are we going to be okay?" Lily asked, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "We're going to be fine," Daniel said, with the confidence of a man who'd weathered countless storms. This boat was designed by people who understood the sea's moods. She'll take care of us if we take care of her. As if to test his words, a particularly strong gust of wind shrieked through the rigging, causing Catherine's dream to heel slightly as she tugged against her anchor. But the yacht's motion was controlled, purposeful, the behavior of a vessel designed to dance with the sea rather than fight it. "I should check the anchor," Daniel said, already moving toward his foul weather gear. We should check the anchor, Catherine corrected, reaching for her own rain jacket. We're a team, remember? Lily looked between them with the wisdom of someone who'd learned to read adult emotions with surgical precision. Can I help too? You can help by staying safe and dry in here, Daniel said gently. But you can also be our communications officer, watch the radio, keep track of weather updates, let us know if anything important comes through. The responsibility made Lily straighten with pride. I can do that. I know all the radio protocols you taught me. Outside, the storm was building with the inexorable power that made sailors both respect and fear the sea. Rain lashed the deck in horizontal sheets, and the wind howled through the rigging with a voice that seemed almost alive. But Catherine's dream held steady, her anchor buried deep in the sandy bottom, her hull cutting through the waves with the grace her designers had built into every line. Daniel and Catherine worked together with the fluid efficiency they'd developed over months of shared challenges. She handled the windlass controls while he dove beneath the surface to check the anchor's set, their movements coordinated by trust and experience rather than shouted commands that the wind would steal anyway. She's holding perfectly, Daniel reported as they retreated to the cockpit, both soaked to the skin, but grinning with the exhilaration that came from working with forces beyond human control. Your father built her well, Catherine shouted over the wind. Thomas would be proud to see her handling conditions like this. He'd be proud to see you handling conditions like this, Daniel replied, wiping rain from his eyes. You've become quite the sailor, Ms. Thompson. Catherine's laugh was bright and wild, touched with the kind of joy that could only be found in moments of perfect challenge. I had good teachers, both of them. They spent the next 4 hours monitoring the storm's progress, taking turns on watch while the other rested. It was a long, wild night that tested every system on the yacht and every skill they'd developed as a crew. But Catherine's dream rose to meet each challenge with the resilience her builders had designed into her bones, and her human crew found rhythms of cooperation that felt as natural as breathing. When dawn finally broke through the dissipating storm clouds, they found themselves in a world washed clean and sparkling. The sea had settled into long, regular swells that rocked the yacht gently, and the air tasted of salt and possibility. We did it, Lily announced with quiet satisfaction as they shared breakfast in the salon, watching the sunrise paint the water gold and pink. We survived our first real storm. We more than survived, Catherine said, reaching across the table to squeeze Lily's hand. We thrived. We worked together like we've been doing this for years instead of months. Daniel felt a deep contentment settle in his chest as he watched his two favorite people in the world. The storm had indeed been a test, but not just of their seamanship or the yacht's seaworthiness. It had been a test of what they'd built together, trust, love, and the kind of partnership that could weather any storm. So where to now? He asked, studying the chart spread across the table. We've got the whole world ahead of us. Greece, Catherine said immediately. I want Lily to see the islands where I fell in love with sailing. I want to show you both the places my father and I dreamed about visiting together. And after Greece? Lily asked, tracing their potential route with her finger. Wherever the wind takes us, Catherine replied, echoing the words Daniel had spoken when they left Newport. That's the beauty of this life we can follow. Our curiosity chase perfect weather, discover places we never knew existed. The next 6 months proved the wisdom of that philosophy. They sailed through the Mediterranean like explorers from an earlier age, stopping in tiny fishing villages where time seemed to move at the speed of tides rather than clocks. Lily learned to speak basic Greek from fishermen's children, studied marine biology in crystal-clear waters teeming with life, and developed the kind of confidence that came from discovering she could adapt to any situation. Catherine blossomed in ways that astonished them all. The tense, controlled executive gradually gave way to someone more elemental, a woman who woke with the sun, who could read weather patterns in cloud formations, who found deep satisfaction in the simple rituals of shipboard life. She still managed her business empire through satellite communications, but those responsibilities became background music to the symphony of their sailing life. For Daniel, each day brought the profound satisfaction of watching his carefully restored yacht perform exactly as her designers had intended. Catherine's dream carried them across thousands of miles, with grace and reliability, her systems functioning flawlessly, her comfort and safety never compromised. But more than that, she became a floating home in the truest sense, a place where love lived and grew and transformed three separate souls into a family. The real test of their new life came not from external storms, but from internal weather. 6 months into their voyage, as they sailed through the Greek islands under perfect Mediterranean skies, Catherine received news that threatened to shatter their carefully constructed paradise. "Thompson Maritime is in trouble," she announced after a particularly long satellite phone conversation with her board of directors. Her face was pale, etched with the kind of stress they hadn't seen since leaving Newport. Daniel looked up from the navigation chart he'd been updating, immediately alert to the tension in her voice. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that could destroy everything my father built. Our biggest competitor has been systematically undermining our contracts while I've been away. They're claiming I've abandoned my responsibilities, that Thompson Maritime lacks leadership." Lily, who'd been quietly working on her mathematics lessons at the salon table, looked up with the intuitive understanding that had always made her seem older than her years. "Does that mean we have to go back?" The question hung in the air like morning mist, beautiful and fragile and threatening to dissipate under the harsh light of reality. Catherine stared out at the azure waters that had become their world, her expression a battlefield between duty and desire. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe. The board wants me to return immediately to take active control before we lose any more ground." Daniel felt the familiar cold grip of impending loss, the same sensation he'd experienced when watching Sarah slip away one day at a time. But this loss would be different, not inevitable like cancer, but chosen, traded for the sake of corporate responsibility and inherited obligation. "What do you want to do?" he asked, though he was afraid of the answer. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her storm-blue eyes reflecting depths of conflict that had nothing to do with weather. 3 years ago, I would have already been packing. Duty before everything else, responsibility before happiness, the company's needs before my own. And now I've remembered what it feels like to be truly alive. I've learned that love is worth more than any quarterly profit report, that watching Lily discover the world is more satisfying than any board meeting, that feeling your arms around me at sunset is better than any corporate victory. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he processed the implications of her words. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that my father didn't build Thompson Maritime just to build a business empire. He built it to create a legacy that would outlast him, to provide security and opportunity for future generations. But what kind of legacy is worth sacrificing the very things that make life meaningful?" Catherine moved to the chart table where Daniel stood, her hands finding his, with the surety of someone who'd discovered her true north. "I'm saying that I choose this. I choose us. I choose the life we've built together over the life I inherited. But the company, your responsibilities, can be managed by people I trust, guided by principles I establish, monitored through the same technology that's kept me connected all these months." Catherine's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd wrestled with angels and won. I'm not abandoning Thompson Maritime. I'm evolving it, turning it into something that serves life instead of consuming it. Lily looked up from her schoolwork with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Does this mean we don't have to choose between being happy and being responsible? Catherine knelt beside Lily's chair, taking the girl's hands in hers with infinite tenderness. It means we're going to try something revolutionary, sweetheart. We're going to prove that you can honor your obligations while still following your heart. The decision transformed everything and nothing. Over the following weeks, Catherine orchestrated a corporate restructuring that would have impressed business schools around the world. She promoted trusted executives to key positions, established oversight systems that would keep her informed without requiring her physical presence, and created a new company philosophy that prioritized sustainable growth over maximum profit. It's actually brilliant, she explained to Daniel one evening, as they anchored off the island of Santorini, the whitewashed buildings glowing like pearls in the setting sun. Running the company remotely forces me to focus on big-picture strategy instead of getting bogged down in daily minutiae. I'm a better CEO from here than I ever was from a Manhattan office. And the board is okay with this arrangement. Catherine's smile was equal parts satisfaction and mischief. The board will be okay with whatever keeps the stock price climbing, and since our new approach is already showing improved efficiency and employee satisfaction, they're willing to call me a visionary instead of irresponsible. Daniel marveled at how completely Catherine had transformed in the months since they'd left Newport. The woman who'd once been terrified of choosing personal happiness over corporate duty had found a way to honor both, creating a life that was both meaningful and successful by any measure. But it was the smaller changes that moved him most deeply. The way Catherine sang while preparing breakfast, unconsciously happy in a way she'd probably never been before. The easy intimacy that had developed between her and Lily, conversations that flowed from homework, helped to life philosophy without missing a beat. The moments when he would catch Catherine looking at him with an expression of such complete contentment that it took his breath away. Their second winter aboard Catherine's Dream found them in the Caribbean following the trade winds through island chains that seemed designed by poets rather than geologists. They developed rhythms of life that felt as natural as tides, mornings spent sailing between islands, afternoons, exploring coral reefs and colonial towns, evenings, sharing meals in the cockpit while tropical stars wheeled overhead. It was in the British Virgin Islands, anchored in a bay so perfect it seemed fictional, that Daniel realized he wanted to spend the rest of his life exactly where he was. Not just geographically, but emotionally surrounded by the two people who'd taught him that healing and love were not just possible but inevitable when you opened your heart to the right possibilities. "Catherine," he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. Lily had fallen asleep in the cockpit between them, exhausted by a day of snorkeling and beach exploration. Catherine's response was dreamy contentment evident in every line of her body. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her turn to face him fully, storm-blue eyes alert with attention. "What is it?" Daniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "I love you. Not just grateful for what you've given us, love, or comfortable companionship love. I mean bone-deep, soul-stirring, can't imagine life without you love." Catherine's smile was radiant enough to rival the Caribbean sunset. "Daniel Carter, I've been waiting months for you to say that. You have. I've been in love with you since that first morning on the yacht, when you tried to explain how you'd listened to her memories to know what she needed. But I was afraid to say it first, afraid you might think I was just grateful, or caught up in the adventure of it all. Daniel reached into the pocket of his shorts, his fingers closing around the small velvet box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. "In that case, I have a question for you." Catherine's breath caught as he slid from his seat to kneel on the cockpit sole, the box gleaming in his palm like captured starlight. "Daniel, Catherine Thompson, will you marry me? Will you let me love you for the rest of my life through fair weather and foul, in whatever ports we choose to call home?" The ring he'd chosen was perfect for their unconventional life, a sapphire the color of deep ocean water, surrounded by diamonds that sparkled like sunlight on waves. But it was the love in his eyes that made Catherine's answer inevitable. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about dolphins and fairy tales. They looked down at the child who'd been the bridge between their separate lives, whose wisdom and trust had made their love possible. "Should we wake her up to tell her?" Catherine asked. "Let her sleep," Daniel said, pulling Catherine into his arms as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "She already knows. Kids always know when the people they love are happy." They were married 3 months later in a ceremony that would have made wedding planners weep with envy and fairy tale writers proud of their imaginations. The location was a private beach on Mustique, with Catherine's dream anchored just offshore like a magnificent backdrop to their vows. Lily served as maid of honor, her dress a confection of white silk and Caribbean sunshine that made her look like a princess from some maritime fairy tale. Alexandra flew in from New York to officiate, having been ordained online specifically for the occasion. The guest list was small but perfect. A handful of their closest sailing friends, the local fishing families who'd adopted them during their months in the islands, and Frank Kowalski from Newport Shipyard, who'd flown down with tools and spare parts and stayed for the celebration. But it was Thomas Thompson's presence that made the ceremony truly magical. Not physically, of course, he'd been gone for years, but spiritually, in the yacht that bore his daughter's name in the love story, his final letters had orchestrated, in the way the wind picked up just as Daniel and Catherine exchanged rings, filling Catherine's dream sails and making her dance at anchor as if she were celebrating too. "Do you, Catherine, take Daniel to be your husband, to sail through life's storms and calms together, to navigate by the stars of love and commitment?" Alexandra's voice carried across the water with the solemnity of ancient vows and the joy of new beginnings. "I do," Catherine said, her voice strong and clear. "With all my heart, I do." "And do you, Daniel, take Catherine to be your wife, to be her harbor in troubled waters and her compass toward happiness?" "I do," Daniel replied, thinking of Sarah's blessing and Lily's trust and the impossible journey that had brought them all to this perfect moment. "Forever and always, I do." When they kissed as husband and wife, the assembled guests cheered, seabirds cried overhead, and Catherine's dream rocked gently at anchor as if blessing their union. It was a moment of such complete rightness that even the sea seemed to approve. The reception was held aboard the yacht, with tables set on deck under strings of lights that transformed Catherine's dream into something from a maritime fairy tale. The food was provided by local chefs who understood that the best celebrations honored both tradition and innovation, and the music was provided by island musicians whose steel drums made the night air shimmer with joy. But it was the toasts that made the evening truly memorable. Alexandra spoke about the man who'd orchestrated the entire love story, from beyond the grave, raising her glass to Thomas Thompson, who understood that the best legacies are measured in love, not dollars. Frank Kowalski, gruff and uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, surprised everyone by becoming emotional as he spoke about watching Daniel transform from a struggling widower into a man who'd found his place in the world. "Some people fix boats," he said, his voice thick with uncharacteristic sentiment. "Daniel fixes souls. He fixed this yacht. He fixed Catherine's heart. And somehow in the process, he fixed his own." But it was Lily who brought down the house with a toast that was equal parts innocence and wisdom. Standing on a chair so she could be seen over the adults, she raised her glass of sparkling cider and spoke with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted that love could conquer any obstacle. "When Mama died, Daddy was really sad for a long time. He tried to hide it, but I could tell. Then we found Catherine's dream, and she was sad too because nobody loved her anymore. But Daddy knew how to fix sad boats, and it turned out that fixing her helped fix him too. And then Catherine came back, and she was sad because she missed her daddy, but we helped fix that too. So I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes broken things find each other and help each other get better. And that's the best kind of family, the kind that helps everyone heal." There wasn't a dry eye in the house when she finished, and Daniel felt his heart expand with such love for his daughter that he thought it might burst. Lily had understood with the clarity only children possessed that their family had been built not despite their individual brokenness, but because of it. They'd healed each other through love and patience and the simple act of showing up for one another day after day, choice after choice. As the evening wound down and their guests prepared to return to shore, Daniel and Catherine found themselves alone on deck with Lily, who'd fallen asleep in Catherine's lap during the last dance. The lights of Mustique twinkled like terrestrial stars, and the gentle roll of the yacht beneath them felt like being rocked by the sea itself. "So, Mrs. Carter," Daniel said, testing out the sound of Catherine's new name, "how does it feel to be married to a boat mechanic?" Catherine's smile was luminous in the soft light. "It feels like coming home, like finding the place I was always meant to be." "And what about tomorrow? Where do we sail next?" "Wherever the wind takes us," Catherine replied, the phrase that had become their family motto. "But Daniel, I don't care where we go as long as we go together." They sailed north the next morning, beginning the long passage back toward Newport, and the life they'd built in their absence. But it wasn't retreat or surrender. It was completion of a circle, the natural rhythm of tides that always return to their source. The year they'd spent circumnavigating not just oceans, but the landscape of the human heart, had transformed them all in ways both subtle and profound. Lily had grown from a bright 8-year-old into a confident 9-year-old who spoke 3 languages and could navigate by the stars. Catherine had evolved from a grief-stricken executive into a woman who'd learned to balance responsibility with joy, duty with dreams. And Daniel had healed from the devastating loss of his first love into someone capable of embracing a second chance at happiness. But perhaps most importantly, they'd learned that home wasn't a place, it was the people you chose to love, and the life you built together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one nautical mile at a time. When Catherine's dream finally entered Newport Harbor, 18 months after leaving it, they found a crowd waiting on the pier. Word of their return had spread through the sailing community, and it seemed like half of Newport had turned out to welcome them home. Alexandra stood at the front of the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she watched the yacht approach with her characteristic grace. "Welcome home, you crazy sailors," Frank Kowalski called as Daniel maneuvered Catherine's dream into her old slip, with the confidence of someone who'd learned to handle her in every conceivable condition. As they secured the dock lines and began greeting old friends, Daniel felt the deep satisfaction of a journey completed and a life well lived. They'd taken the biggest risk imaginable, abandoning security for adventure, choosing love over fear, trusting that the universe would catch them if they fell. And it had. They'd found not just romance but partnership, not just adventure, but meaning, not just happiness, but the kind of bone-deep contentment that came from living authentically. "Are we home now?" Lily asked as they stood on deck surrounded by friends and well-wishers, but somehow still complete as their own small family. Daniel looked at Catherine, who was radiant with joy and satisfaction, then at his daughter, who'd grown wise and confident during their year on the water. "We've been home all along, sweetheart. Home is wherever we are as long as we're together." And Catherine's dream. "She'll always be our home too, our floating sanctuary, our gateway to adventure, our reminder that beautiful things can be brought back to life with patience and love." As the celebration continued around them, Daniel thought about Thomas Thompson's final letter, the one that had somehow predicted this exact moment. The man who'd built this yacht as a monument to his love for his daughter had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Catherine's dream hadn't just been restored to her original glory, she'd been transformed into something even more precious, the vessel that carried a new family toward whatever adventures awaited them. The yacht rocked gently at her dock, her bright work gleaming in the late afternoon sun, her name visible in elegant gold script across her stern. Catherine's dream no longer a reminder of loss, but a celebration of love found, love restored, love that could survive any storm and find its way home across any ocean. As the sun set over Newport Harbor, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have made the Caribbean jealous, Daniel Carter stood with his arms around his wife and daughter, knowing with absolute certainty that some dreams are worth waiting a lifetime to achieve, and some love stories are beautiful enough to justify every broken heart that came before them. The restoration was complete, the dream was real, and the greatest adventure was just beginning.